Roll for Crit is supported by our friends on Patreon. Come join the High Rollers at patreon.com/rollforcrit. All aboard this Roll for Crit review of Maglev Metro from Bezier Games. In this game, you will be planning out a new futuristic train system and trying to outwit your opponents by planning and building a more efficient system. Pick up passengers and drop them off at their destination in order to prove you are the best train engineer.
Your goal in Maglev Metro is to score the most points by building effective train routes and carrying passengers that you pick up to the stations they want to go to. On your turn, you will have 2 actions to start with. That number can increase as the game progresses, and how efficient and powerful those actions are is going to change as the game goes on based on your personal action board, but we'll discuss that in depth in a little while. Some of the actions that you can take include laying out track tiles for your little train of your personal color to travel along. You'll be placing these tracks so that they'll be connected to the various stations on the board of different colors, which represent different types of buildings, studios, stores, factories, what have you. And on your turn, you will also be able to move your train between those stations. You'll be moving your train in the direction it's facing along the route that you've laid out. Once it hits the end, then it will reverse, and then you can move back in the opposite direction. There will also be an action you can take to reverse it before that happens if you really need to turn around quickly. The reason you're moving to these different stations is to pick up the different types of passengers that are laid out on top of them. The gold, bronze, and silver ones are robots, while the different colors are human passengers. And the reason that's important is because these passengers want to go to the stations that match their particular color. So a pink passenger wants to go to the pink station. Once you have dropped them off there, then you get to put them onto your own player board onto a variety of different spots that will have different effects.
Picking up and dropping off passengers aren't simply just to get victory points, it's also going to advance what kind and how many actions you can do on your turn. Robot passengers, for example, tend to upgrade your actions here or in some other places. For example, the more you put in the capacity section, the more passengers you can actually carry. The colored workers tend to do more for victory points, so placing this pink worker here and filling up this column or this column will give you more points at the end of the game. There is also the extra actions track, which will give you more actions in your turn, as well as unlocking stations. At the beginning, you can only build the stations that robots want to go to. But if you fill up these columns, for example, this player can now build the pink stations and also pick up and drop off pink passengers. Same goes for each other color there. At the start of the game, you'll get 4 victory point cards that will only be known to you and revealed at the end of the game. Each one has its own category, which involves different things such as kinds of passengers you want to collect, your board state, the track, and different stations to connect. However, you'll only be able to score one of these unless you fill up these rows. For each row you fill up, you'll be able to score an additional goal of your choice at the end of the game. If you're able to fill up all 3, you can score all 4 cards. The game progresses as you pick up and drop off passengers, with the refill action allowing you to pull more passengers from this bag to add to the station, therefore picking them up and dropping them off at new stations. Once this bag is empty, as well as every station type being built, that initiates endgame. You will finish up the round, and then each player will have one more turn. Afterwards, you'll count up your victory points and see who is the winner.
This game comes from designer Ted Alspach, who's done games like Suburbia, so he's right at home in this city building planning adjacent kind of theme. And looking at it, you could definitely make comparisons to other pick up and deliver games, or even something just like Ticket to Ride, where you're planning out routes and making connections. And I think one of the big things that makes this one feel special is the fact that you really are planning out your routes fully, like not just where you're going to travel, but also literally laying out the tracks for those, and only you have access to those. Everybody has their own tracks, but you're going to have this very unique map at the end of each game, depending on where different places are built, different stations, and what players' goals are. And every time you play, you can have these really different colors overlapping and intersecting with each other. I think it gives you a lot of room for creativity and to decide how and where you want to place things.
I really do love the clear tiles, the way they're designed so that this isn't like Ticket to Ride where you can sort of take someone's route before them. You can end up pretty much with this convoluted map of colored lines going all over the place that would look like probably a regular actual subway map.
except probably more efficient than a real one.
It depends on the
Hopefully.
city. But I think though the biggest thing game wise isn't just that you can plan out your route. What I like that because it looks pretty, but it's almost that you plan how you make your route. That player board when you pick up passengers affects what your actions are. You don't just simply like on your turn you can move, pick up, and drop off. There's well, I can make it so I can move really far, or I can carry a lot of people and drop them off quickly, but I can only pick up one at a time. And that modular board, so to speak, really affects the choices you make and how you're going to deal with them in a really clever way that I think is really enjoyable, especially for the puzzle solvers out there who really like to squeak out that extra efficiency in games.
Yeah, it has that feeling of a lot of games where you have your own personal board or that you're building up almost like an engine building thing, but not directly, but in some ways, like if you fill up, if you make one action better, it could very easily indirectly or directly make another action more efficient as well by association. And you can end up with very different loadouts from other players. Sometimes I'll be like, why did you just, your whole turn was moving? But then you picked up a bunch of people, whereas I can move really far easily with just one action, but then I have to spend the rest of my actions to pick people up. So you can take very different paths to sometimes to hopefully do better than your opponents and sometimes kind of get to the same place, but it feels like you're really doing your own thing. There's not too much player interaction in this one, like a Ticket to Ride or a lot of these other games. The interaction really is in what people are doing with places on the board, because like you said, you can't block paths off. Instead, it's about, oh, there's some passengers I want at that spot, so I need to get there just to make sure no one else takes them. Or there's a station I want in that spot, and you only have so many stations of each color, so I really want to make sure I get the ability to build it before anyone else can.
Speaking of which, there are going to be times maybe like where the track you laid up or like I needed to move earlier, but now I can't. In some games, it's stink because well, you made your choice, you're locked in. Both of them are you're allowed to take them back. There is the adjust action, which is pretty much moving those metallic meeple around your board, which is really helpful because sometimes you're like, I know next turn I'm gonna have to do a lot of track manipulation, so I'm gonna need to move a bunch of guys up there for that one round. And conversely, the track action isn't just putting down track, it's removing. So let's say like you were planning and someone built the last pink station in a corner you don't have track. You're like, well, I gotta remove my track to get over there now. And I really like that because it really helps you. Like, yeah, it stinks if you have to spend your whole turn to pick up track to place it later. But the fact you have that as an option, I think, helps you feel a bit more like you can adjust a lot easier depending on what happens throughout the game.
Yeah, you have the freedom to experiment a little bit. Of course, you want to be as efficient as possible, but you always know that if you need to, you can back up and change your plans on the fly if you have to do that. And of course, there are the other sections on your board, which are primarily about scoring points, which will either help you score more points for your tracks or your individual passengers on your board, or allow you to score more of your secret victory condition, your goal cards. So it's a decision I think usually it depends on your play. I think there's a lot of different strategies you can employ, but generally I think people will maybe around the halfway point of the game start pivoting towards putting more things into those areas. And it's like, what do you prioritize based on which goals do you have? There's multiple ways that you can score points, and everybody might find a different way to go about it. I think it's interesting that to discover that there's room to experiment and see which strategies work best for you.
Speaking of which, the four kinds of goals, the suggested way, and definitely I think after what we've played is what we enjoy, is to in essence draft from that pile. Like they give, I think it's 16 or something in each pile, so there's plenty of goals. Some of them though, like yes, there's always like I'm not gonna be able to score this any well because of what's happening on the field. We felt like some of them like I don't know if I'd ever want to score this if I got it, and it is a little annoying. There are some. I mean, maybe if I played enough, it wouldn't be, but it just felt like they're just straight up duds. Like before the game starts.
Yeah, I mean, it's some of them definitely seem a little trickier, and I think it also depends on your personal play style and what you're trying to do, as well as the player count. Some of them may work better with more or fewer players. It's interesting because The idea I think is a little bit that you unlock the ability to score those cards, like we said, with that part of your board. So if you end up with a card that you really don't like, you can just devote those resources to another area and
Mhm.
say, well, I'm just not going to score that one.
No, that is
Um,
definitely true, but it does
yeah,
still feel like if you have 4 cards, you always wanna at least be like, "Well, there's a possibility for them, and maybe I can plan it then."
ideally.
Ideally.
Yeah.
So that was just one of the annoying things dealing with them. And another thing that's this is more of maybe our own little nitpicky stuff, is the colors they chose for passengers. Now, there's 2 main kinds. There's the robots, which are the metallic ones, and the actual people, which are the, pastel, I guess you could say their coloring grouping is. First of all, the metallic ones, silver's fine. And if these weren't shiny, I don't think we'd have too much of a problem. Like, we've seen bronze and gold coins. But with the way they are now, being shiny and not different sizes or anything, there are a couple times where like, is that a bronze or a gold meeple you just put out? You know?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. A lot of them, I think, blended together a little bit. I don't know. I'm sure there's reasons they picked the colors they did for whatever other colors they had for player colors. There's choices that you have to make as a game designer, but it definitely was not ideal. There were lots of times where I was like, I don't know which color is that again. I have to really double check because it's like, is that dark blue or light
that was
blue?
actually, it's not even like, I think you can tell them apart sometimes. There's sometimes like, I pick up the purple meeple. I'm like, what do you mean purple? Dark or light? Like, you mean
I also
indigo
don't know
or
if they're called
coral?
meeples. That's another controversy
Right.
we have at Roll for Crit.
I think they
But
call them workers in the book. I think that's more of me being shorthand here.
neither of us are colorblind. You can tell us. I think they designed it so it should be good for colorblind players. At least that's what I've read. But who knows? For us as normal color seeing people, it didn't work out all the time. I also think that the transparent tiles, this is a real small nitpick, but I did notice that I think those might get scratched up a little bit if you're not careful, and that might not be always super fun. But in practice, if before that happens, they look really pretty on the board. It is the design of it aesthetically is really nice. It has a cool kind of somewhat futuristic train vibe to it that I did really like overall from a visual perspective, in spite of the colors.
Back to the game also, it really just seems there's a lot going on designed to be like, it's sort of point salady, but not in the way where like you don't even know where to begin. You have secret goals, you know what you want to do there, and there's many ways around them. You can upgrade your turns whether you want like a lot of different actions so that like I take 5 actions on my turn, or maybe like I'm only taking 2 or 3, but when I take an action, I pick up a lot of people, or you drop off a lot. And even like scoring the points, like might not being too much of my secret goals, but like my tracks are gonna score me so many points. It just seems like there's so many choices to make, but it doesn't feel overwhelming. And you can adjust it to whatever your playstyle sees fit to do. Crits and misses for Maglev Metro.
Crits. As a player, you'll be laying out your track tiles as you like. You won't be beholden to anything on the board itself. You get to design your own path and decide how your strategy is going to work with the route you've laid out.
The clear tiles will allow you and your opponents to really build your own web of tracks, meaning it's less about who gets there first and more about how do you actually plan your routes.
On your individual player board, you can place your passengers as you see fit, depending on their colors, and have more actions, fewer actions, or very different types of actions than the other players.
The modular aspect of the player board is really where this game shines, allowing people to not simply just take their actions, but actually puzzle out and really build their engines in their own unique take.
The individual goal cards are separated into 4 categories, ensuring that you will have a variety of options as to how to score those points, and they are hidden to prevent other players from being too aggressive and stopping you from getting those unless they can really figure out what you're trying to do.
I'm always a fan of hidden goals because it keeps people guessing till the very end, and the fact that there's such a variety and 4 different kinds means that you'll never be able to truly predict what your opponents have. Misses. Most of the components are excellent, but there are a few issues we had with the game. There are some weird fitting pieces, but most importantly, the color choices for some of the things seem a little bit odd. For us, at the very least, it was a little hard to tell some of these pieces apart when they're on the board together.
Having to pause the game to try to figure out if a worker is purple or coral or light blue or whatever it may be can put a damper on your experience.
There's a large variety of goals in each of the 4 stacks. However, we felt like a couple of them didn't seem to stack up compared to the other goals. Yes, I'm sure they're still possible, but they didn't feel as balanced or at least as enjoyable compared to most of the others.
Depending on the circumstances of the game, it's possible that one player just gets goals that are easier to attain, and it's going to make it a little trickier for you to catch up in points.
Before we continue, I want to quickly talk about the solo mode. In this one, it's pretty similar. You're going to actually remove a worker, though, at the start of your turn, and when that bag is empty, you pretty much are going to count up your points and then subtract for each worker you remove. I.e., you're pretty much going to try to at least get more on the field or you collect than letting them get out of the bag. And it is funny, they have a huge score sheet depending on which map you play on, and it is nice that they have different maps. I'm sort of excited to see what other maps they come up with for expansions, but ooh, some of those names, it's like the best you get is entry level engineer. You know, you're not, don't be expecting to get, you did all right at the halfway point.
Hey, it's tough work, man. Being a futuristic train engineer, they hold you to a higher standard. But you enjoyed the solo mode a lot, I think.
I did, though I need to do it more. I didn't do too much before this video.
I think that's what I like about this game is that I feel as though there are a lot of different strategies. And even now I'm thinking about it and thinking, going back to this, I'm going to try a different thing out. And maybe it won't work, but there's different options for me to take as opposed to there just being like, this is the way to victory, which I really like. I think if people like these types, if you like train games, honestly, if you've ever liked a train themed board game, then I think you should check out Maglev Metro and you'll probably enjoy it. It does some things differently, but it has the kind of vibe and that I think people like from a lot of those games. Without a lot of the aggression, it is more of that you are kind of doing your own thing for the most part. So if you're someone who likes more player interaction, you might not dig this one as much. But for me, I'm totally fine with that. And I think this is a real solid entry.
Yeah, I mean, like, yes, you can sort of tell, like, okay, that person's trying to connect the silver station with the red station. But for the most part, I think where it shines for me is that modular player board. It is so much fun to be like, all right, I picked up this worker. Do I want capacity now or this? I'm not simply just pick up and deliver to get points. You know, I'm not simply it's like, I do want a bronze worker so I can get that, but I'm closer to this red station and I could pick up that. Oh, if I refill on the pink station, I don't need pink workers because pink, you can't put people on their own station because it doesn't make sense. So I just feel like that kind of puzzle solving nature of like really adapting your actions and that kind of stuff is a lot of the fun that's going to be drawn from this.
Yeah, it has that puzzle building, puzzle engine kind of thing for your own personal board. If you like that sort of thing, you like personalizing and customizing how you play a game, take a look at it. It's available right now. If you've had the chance to play it, let us know in the comments what you think about Maglev Metro. And if they're going to be putting out expansions, perhaps in the future, what types of maps would you like to see, different kinds of goals? What do you think might fit for a future addition to this game?
Let us know in those comments down below. Till then, I'm Will.
I'm Jonathan.
And this has been Roll for Crit.
If you love board game content, do us a favor, like and subscribe, and support us on Patreon.
Keep watching our content to guarantee you'll top deck a good video.